The galaxy thought they understood war. They thought they could contain humanity's rage. But one unspeakable act against human civilians, triggered something far worse than retaliation. It triggered humanity's full attention. This story builds from hubris to tragedy to revelation, culminating in a galaxy realizing too late that you never hurt the ones humans love unless you're ready to burn. Peace was the illusion. For a time, the galaxy thought it had finally found peace. Treaties were signed. Borders were respected. The great wars of expansion had ended. The stars were quiet. And for the first time in generations, no fleets burned across the void. No planets were shelved from orbit. No embassies went silent in the night. Instead, there was trade, culture, diplomacy, and standing among the new order of peace was Earth, humanity, the youngest among the major powers, late to the stars but fast to adapt. They didn't bring fleets when they arrived. They brought ideas, solutions, technology that ran too hot, and minds that ran even hotter. And a galaxy welcomed them cautiously. There were memories, after all, whispers of Earth's early skirmishes, the Rim Wars, the defensive strikes, the mining incident on Tel Varric. But those were in the past. Humanity had changed, evolved, hadn't they? Earth had become a model citizen, efficient, honest, focused. Their people served in joint missions. Their scientists pushed galactic medicine forward by decades. Their ships patrolled disputed zones calmly. Some species even called them domesticated predators. A joke, of course, but not entirely wrong. Yes, humans were fast. Yes, their minds were sharp. Yes, their soldiers trained like it was still the apocalypse. But they were polite now, disciplined, civilized, tamed. And so, slowly, the galaxy let its guard down. Not all at once, but little by little, protocol by protocol. Human vessels were allowed deeper into secure sectors. Their ambassadors were invited to more sensitive discussions. Their colonies, once watched carefully, were declared safe, no longer needing observation. And among them, one shone brighter than most. Alera Prime, a jewel of cooperation. The first human-majority world co-funded by the Council. A shared colony, built with Terran ambition and galactic oversight. A testbed for peace. A symbol of trust. Lush valleys. Terraforming finished ahead of schedule. Children in mixed-species schools. Markets filled with food and laughter. Alera wasn't just a success. It was a promise. We moved on, people said. We've learned to live together. And for a time, it was true. The news feeds were quiet. Trade was good. Earth didn't even raise its voice at the last summit. So when Alera went silent, no one panicked. Signals drop. Systems fail. It happens. They sent a courier drone. Routine. Automated. Nothing urgent. The drone didn't return. Still no panic. Just a raised eyebrow. Then a scout vessel. Armed but lightly. Just in case. It came back 3 days later. Without its crew. Only the ship. Floating. Drifting. Silent. Its logs were corrupted. Its black box had been physically torn out. And that was when the questions began. Not from Earth. Not yet. From everyone else. Because the peace had been too quiet. Too easy. Too clean. Some said it was pirates. Others said it was a rogue AI. There was even talk of a solar flare disrupting comms. All theories. All safe. No one wanted to say the truth. No one wanted to believe that something had happened to Alera. Not to them. Not to the colony that proved peace was real. But the silence stretched on. Earth still didn't speak. They didn't accuse. They didn't rage. They simply withdrew. Ships stopped responding to hails. Research stations went offline for maintenance. Terran diplomats returned home for consultations. And behind closed doors, certain captains were recalled. Certain fleets were repositioned. Certain colonies began whispering emergency codes not used in over a century. The kind last heard during wartime. But still, Earth said nothing. Not yet. Because humanity knew something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Peace is not a gift. It is not a law. It is not the default state of civilization. Peace is a pause. And something unthinkable, had just pressed play. The day the signal stopped. They said the silence was probably technical. They said Alara was in a tricky orbit. Said the atmospheric layers could disrupt comms. Said maybe a relay failed. The council broadcasted calm, encouraged patience, promised a full and thorough investigation. But Earth already knew, and the humans didn't wait for paperwork. They sent a ship, not a war vessel, not a fleet, just one. Fast, quiet, civilian marked. Its crew was half scientist, half military. Standard for recon, standard for answers. The ship arrived in Alara's orbit at 0431 Universal Standard Time. What they saw didn't match anything the galaxy had prepared them for. There was no city. Not really. The buildings were there, blackened, half buried under ash. But the lights were gone. The life was gone. And the soil was burnt. Not just scorched, sterilized. Every tree, every root, every blade of grass, gone. The air was breathable, technically, but no one dared take off their helmets. Because the stench, the silence, carried weight. Like the planet itself was still grieving. They walked through what used to be the central plaza, found playgrounds melted, statues shattered, shops collapsed in on themselves. No signs of struggle, no signs of defense, just destruction. And the people? Gone. No bodies, no survivors, no emergency shelters. Only shadows burned into walls. Proof that someone had once stood there. Right before the fire came. The deeper they searched, the worse it got. In the school, small chairs overturned. Hollow boards cracked. Lunch trays still holding melted food. In the hospital, beds neatly made. Monitors flatlined. The nursery wing, empty. They weren't evacuated. They weren't saved. They were erased. And at the colony's heart, buried beneath the administrative tower, the recon team found a single storage vault intact. It had been shielded, partially buried. An accident. Or maybe mercy. Inside were fragments of footage, partial data logs. A last attempt to send something before everything went silent. The playback began with static, then a voice. A human. Calm. Controlled. Trying to remain composed. This is Alara Prime. We are under attack. Repeat, we are. Noise. Screams. Explosions. Unknown vessels, not responding to hails. Civilians, there are civilians. Gunfire. Then silence. Then one last sound. A child crying. And then nothing. The recon team sent the data back to Earth. Encrypted. Urgent. Unfiltered. They stayed in orbit for another 30 minutes. Then, by unanimous decision, they burned the surface. Not in rage. Not in vengeance. But in ritual. To honor the dead. To sterilize the ground. To keep what happened there from ever being twisted or rewritten. They didn't even wait for council permission. They lit the sky with flame. And when Earth received the transmission, when those final cries played in a silent chamber on Terran soil, there were no tears, no screaming, no shouting, only stillness, followed by movement. Phones that had not rung in decades began to light up. Old commanders reactivated. Security codes spoken aloud for the first time in generations. Entire systems went dark intentionally. Families called home. Reservists vanished from day jobs. Black site programs blinked online. Earth's skies filled with silent ships. And all of it without a single press release. No announcement. No accusations. Just one internal phrase spoken by Terran leadership. Alara protocol is in effect. The galaxy noticed. Of course they did. But they didn't understand. Not yet. Some still thought it was political posturing. A show of strength. A demand for justice. They didn't realize humanity wasn't seeking justice. It was preparing for judgment. Because what had happened on Alara wasn't a tragedy. Wasn't a misunderstanding. Wasn't an accident. It was a crime. A war crime. The first committed against humanity in over a century. And the galaxy was about to learn something terrible. Humans don't forget. They don't forgive. And when you kill their children, when you make them relive their oldest nightmares, they don't just grieve. They change. The enemy that smiled. It didn't take long to find out who was responsible. Barely a week after the footage from Alara surfaced, a broadcast pulsed across open galactic channels. Unencrypted. Deliberate. Proud. The symbol in the corner belonged to the Zarnathi Confederacy. a coalition of war-bred species known for calculated expansion, resource raiding, and a long list of strategic preemptive operations that everyone else politely called what they were: invasions. They were clever. They were brutal. They were careful never to strike anyone too powerful. Until now, the transmission showed a Zarnathi High Admiral sitting in a throne-like chair, decorated in ceremonial armor, draped in conquest medals. He looked calm, composed, amused, and above all confident. He spoke in common galactic. Let be known, the colony known as Alara Prime was found to be harboring Terran military assets. Its destruction was swift, clean, and necessary for the protection of Zarnathi's sovereignty. He smiled, not a hint of regret, no denial, no apology, just victory. He leaned forward. We recognize that some of you may feel sympathy for the Terrans. We understand. Loss is emotional, but the humans, despite their charm, are still predators in dress uniforms. They hide claws beneath smiles, teeth behind diplomacy. Better to strike first while they're still pretending to be civilized. That was the moment the galaxy shifted, because it wasn't just the act, it was the attitude. The Zarnathi had believed they were being tactical. They had studied human wars, watched their restraint, noted how few times Earth had used its strength in the last century. They assumed it was weakness, that humanity had gone soft, that all the fire had burned out long ago. So they struck. Hard, fast, final. They didn't expect resistance. They expected submission, and they were ready for that. They had built their fleets, reinforced their borders, drawn up long-winded speeches for council chambers, prepared for a scandal, for sanctions, maybe even a trade war. What they were not prepared for was silence. Earth didn't reply, not officially, not through diplomatic channels, not through military escalation. They didn't call for vengeance. They didn't call for war. They called no one. They just moved, and that's what unnerved the rest of the galaxy. Because when the Zarnathi declared their victory, no human ambassador showed up to protest. No angry broadcasts. No emergency press releases. Only quiet skies and Terran colonies entering lockdown. Civilian ships rerouted. Cargo haulers suddenly escorted by black-holed vessels with no identification. A slow, quiet hum of activity. Not fury. Focus. Meanwhile, the Zarnathi paraded. They held public speeches, declared themselves defenders of the galaxy, warned others not to make the same mistake as Alara. They didn't realize they were the ones making the mistake. Because Earth wasn't posturing. It wasn't bluffing. It wasn't grandstanding. It was remembering. The last time humanity had been this quiet was after the siege of Jupiter, and the retaliation that followed left 3 systems uninhabited. The council started to panic quietly. Emergency meetings, hidden communications, talks of intervention. But it was too late, because the Zarnathi weren't listening. They thought the humans were afraid. And that's when Earth finally spoke. One message, 2 words, broadcast on every open frequency. No encryption, no introduction. Just this. Noted. Preparing. The words echoed across every comms channel. Simple, cold, precise. No threats, no rage. Just a timestamp, a confirmation. The kind you send before a system reboot, or a warhead goes live. The galaxy went still. And for the first time since the stars had begun to burn, the most feared predators in the Zarnathi fleet started to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. The cold silence before the fire. There were no speeches, no flags raised, no music, just silence. A cold, heavy silence that crept outward from Earth like a pressure wave. Tightening lungs, still hands, bending conversations around a question no one wanted to ask out loud. What are they planning? Because humanity wasn't responding. They were shifting. Everything changed in the span of a week. Commercial vessels rerouted without notice. Trade routes adjusted. Civilian ships no longer travel alone. They now moved in convoys, shielded, escorted by Terran patrol craft. Diplomatic presence? Gone. Earth recalled every ambassador, every attaché, every outreach team. Just vanished, as if they'd never been there at all. Research stations sent their last files. Science vessels canceled collaboration. Even cultural exchange programs, art, language, history, were placed on indefinite hold. And then came the blackouts. Human colonies stopped broadcasting. Mining sites stopped reporting yields. Military frequencies went dark. Entire systems fell silent by choice. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't fear. It was coordination. The kind that moves with purpose, with memory. Because this wasn't humanity flailing in grief. This wasn't emotional retaliation. This was planning, logistics, positioning, like chess pieces sliding into place, on a board no one else could see. And the scariest part? They moved without urgency. No panic, no chaos, no rush. Just calm, practiced efficiency, like they'd done this before. And of course they had. They called it a Lara protocol. But that wasn't its real name. It was an old code, buried deep, from Earth's last total war. A phrase whispered in history books, feared even by human generals. Full-spectrum retaliation. A doctrine with no diplomacy, no limit, no pause button. If triggered, the response would not be strategic. It would not be proportional. It would be total. And that's what made the silence so terrifying. Because there were no ultimatums, no time frames, no demands, just systems going dark, fleets shifting position, weapons coming online that no one had seen in 100 years. The kind with no names, just code names. Raven Teeth, Stonefire, Veil Strike, old projects, black site designs, rumors that were never meant to be confirmed. Until now. And the Zarnathi? They still believed they could handle it. They issued another broadcast, accused Earth of cowardice, dared them to retaliate. They thought humanity was hesitating. They didn't understand. Earth was calculating, not whether to strike, but how much of the Zarnathi should be left when it was over. Across council space, quiet fear began to bloom, not because anyone doubted Earth's power, but because they remembered the past, the early days, before treaties, before peace, when human fleets were ragged, desperate, savage, when they won not by strength, but by the refusal to stop. They've been pushed to extinction more than once. And every time, they didn't just survive. They came back stronger. So when the stars began to shimmer with Terran drive signatures, when orbital platforms went live over forgotten moons, when Terran intelligence units started pulling personnel from deep-covered, decades-old assignments, everyone knew this wasn't a war. This was a reckoning. One council advisor, long retired, was quoted in a leaked private message. "We didn't ban war. We just forgot who we were dealing with. And now, the humans are reminding us." Because Earth wasn't launching a campaign. They were enacting a philosophy, a belief system carved into their bones, passed through centuries. If you come for our children, you don't get to beg for your own. The retaliation, that wasn't. The Zarnathi were ready, or so they believed. They activated defense grids, mobilized armadas, reinforced their homeworld's orbit with every warship they could spare. They issued public statements, spoke of strength, of readiness, of containing the human reaction. But behind closed doors, they were nervous, because Earth still hadn't moved the way they expected. No ultimatums, no declaration of war, no propaganda, just silence, in motion. Every now and then, a human recon drone would enter a system, then vanish. Or a Terran signature would appear in deep space, then flicker out. The Zarnathi scrambled to follow, to track, to predict, but they never found a pattern, because there wasn't one. Until, finally, something did happen. But it wasn't what the Zarnathi had prepared for. There was no invasion, no orbital bombardment, no demands, just loss. A mining station in the D-Riggs belt stopped transmitting. No alarms, no alerts, just gone. Recovery teams found it intact, completely powered, every system functional, except for one thing. No crew, no signs of struggle, no blood, no damage, just empty halls. Warm meals still untouched in the mess. Chairs knocked over mid-sentence. Vanished. 2 days later, it happened again. A relay hub, critical to Zarnathi communications. Also empty. Power systems untouched. No breach detected. Doors locked from the inside. No one left. And then a third. This time a battleship. Top of the line. Docked for maintenance. Its crew of 900 disappeared overnight. All escape pods accounted for. All logs wiped. No trace. The Zarnathi tried to suppress it. Control the information. Isolate the systems. But it was too late. The pattern had begun. And it wasn't a war. It was a message. We don't need to fight you. We just need you to realize that when we want something gone, it disappears. The Council tried to intervene. They begged Earth for answers. Earth sent none. Because this wasn't war. This was extraction. This was surgical. No collateral. No spectacle. Just absence. One by one, critical systems fell silent. The Zarnathi lost fuel depots, data archives, medical research facilities. All untouched. All perfectly preserved. Just emptied. Their empire wasn't being destroyed. It was being unplugged. Every time they tried to regroup, they found old allies missing. Suppliers gone. Fleets unmanned. They sent diplomats to other powers, only to find doors locked. Because the rest of the galaxy had made its choice. Stay out of the way. Not because they agreed. Not because they condoned it. But because, deep down, every species understood. You don't interfere when a predator punishes someone for touching its young. One Council operative managed to intercept a Terran signal on a deep space frequency. Short, sharp, coded in a dead language from old Earth history. Translation: we are not angry. We are focused. And that was worse. Because anger is messy, unpredictable, explosive. But focus? Focus is clean, precise, inevitable. The Zarnathi still try to fight back. They issued hunting parties, tried to trace the disappearances. They caught one Terran ship. One. It self-destructed before they boarded. Not to kill them, just to deny them anything. And attached to the wreckage, floating silently in space, was a single message pod. It contained a transmission, a woman's voice. Calm, controlled. You will not see us coming. You will not know it started. You will not survive it. We are not at war. We are removing a threat. This is not retaliation. This is restraint. And they meant it, because by then, Earth already had the coordinates of the Zarnathi capital. They had the encryption keys, the fleet formations, the backup systems. They could have glassed the planet in a single day, but they didn't, because war would have been mercy. Instead, they let the Zarnathi watch, as their worlds went silent, as their ships drifted unmanned, as their people simply vanished. No bodies, no graves, just absence, erased from the page. And the rest of the galaxy learned the difference between destruction and disappearance. One council member finally spoke what everyone else was thinking. They weren't sending a message to the Zarnathi. They were sending a warning to the rest of us. And it was this. You don't get to call it war when you kill our civilians. You don't get to walk away from Alera. And you don't get to define the terms of your punishment. The council begs. It started with emergency meetings, then crisis summits, then outright panic. The Galactic Council, once a beacon of order and unity, was now just a room full of terrified diplomats. Because the Zarnathi weren't just losing ships. They were losing entire systems. Not to war, not to invasion, to silence. And the silence was spreading. Automated defenses turned off. Satellite networks blinked out. Sensor buoys, tampered with, distorted, or gone. And no matter what the Zarnathi did, nothing worked. They couldn't track the Terran fleets, couldn't trace their signals, couldn't catch their agents. Because Earth wasn't using conventional warfare. They were using history. Every tactic ever studied. Every failure ever recorded. Every dirty trick Earth had ever endured, they turned into doctrine. And now, it was being executed with cold, terrifying precision. So the Council tried diplomacy. They sent envoys. Messages. Please. Not to Earth. Earth wasn't answering. But to the colonies. To the allied species. To anyone who still had a working Terran frequency. They begged for mediation. For negotiation. For some kind of line they could walk back from. But none came. Until, finally, one message got through. Not to a politician. Not to a general. But to a mother. A human civilian. She had lost a daughter on Alera. The daughter's name was Mia. 5 years old. They found her name in the school registry, a drawing still pinned to the classroom wall. And now, weeks later, her mother stood in front of the camera on a quiet station orbiting Earth. No guards, no speechwriters, no anger, just tired eyes. And she said, "They didn't ask for war. They asked to be left alone. My daughter drew pictures of stars and wanted to make friends with aliens. She never met a Zarnathi. She never saw their warships. She just burned, with everyone else. So you want us to stop? You want peace? Then answer me this. What do you say to a mother who buried vapor?" The council had no answer, because there was none. So they tried something else. They sent a formal request to Earth's ambassador. His name was Calderite. He hadn't spoken publicly since the Alara incident. Not once. Not even internally. Now, he appeared on a secure channel. Face unreadable. Eyes like ice. The council's speaker, a grizzled elder from the Malaria Accord, didn't waste time. "Ambassador Wright, please, we implore you. What do you want? What will it take to end this?" There was a pause. Long, heavy. Then Wright leaned forward and said softly, "You think this is revenge? It's not. This is a correction." Confused silence. He continued, "You called Alara a military target. You justified killing children with legal language and propaganda. You smiled while doing it. You normalized it. So we're removing that normalization. Not with bombs, not with speeches, but with consequence." He stared directly into the lens. "You don't get to call yourselves civilized and burn families alive. You don't get to make monsters and then ask them to be merciful. You want to know what we want?" He leaned back. "We want you to remember what it feels like to fear the dark, to flinch at shadows, to question your safety. We want the word Alara to live in your bones. And when that lesson is finished, when the last person who smiled during that broadcast is gone, maybe then we'll stop." The feed cut. No further messages were received. No answers to follow-up questions. Just Wright's words, playing on loop in every diplomatic chamber across the stars. And outside, beyond the politics, the halls, the orders, Terran ships kept moving. Unseen, unstoppable, unforgiving. And as the council sat in silence, unable to argue, unable to act, they realized something no vote could undo. They weren't in control anymore. Not of Earth, not of the situation, not of the future. And one delegate whispered it out loud, voice shaking. "We should have protected Alara. A fire you can't unlight. It was never meant to spread this far. At least, that's what the galaxy told itself." They thought the response would be surgical, targeted, limited to the Zarnathi. But Earth never said that. In fact, Earth never said anything at all. They just kept moving. The Zarnathi Confederacy collapsed in silence. No treaties, no invasions, no victorious speeches. Just quiet. One by one, their colonies stopped responding. Their fleets stopped broadcasting. Their government vanished. What was left were ruins. Not bombed, not melted, preserved, empty, like someone wanted the galaxy to see exactly what was missing. And then it kept going. Because the Zarnathi hadn't acted alone. Other species had supplied them. Others had looked the other way. Others had profited from the death of Alara. Logistics, weapons, fuel, information. Not direct participants, but not innocent either. And humanity remembered. They always remember. So the blacklist began. Quiet strikes, sudden disappearances, cargo routes that never made a home. Ships found adrift. Crew missing. No distress calls. The pattern was clear. If you helped Alara burn, you don't get to walk away. Whole economies collapsed overnight. Banking sectors vanished. Corporate offices stripped clean, down to the last memory crystal. And still no war declarations. No demands. No warnings. The galaxy began to tremble. Not just from fear, but from guilt. Because everyone had watched. Everyone had seen Alara's silence stretch too long. Everyone had waited for someone else to act. And now, the humans weren't just punishing the killers. They were punishing the silence. The complicity. And there was no stopping it. The old powers tried to unite. Tried to form new coalitions. Emergency pacts. Defense treaties. But trust had shattered. No one knew who was safe. No one knew what Earth had seen. What it had archived. What was waiting to use. Because every time someone asked, the answer was the same. We're just cleaning up. And the weapons? They weren't orbital strikes or fleets of dreadnoughts. They were truth. Human AI tore through encrypted archives, unsealed old transmissions, leaked records of war crimes, corruption, betrayal. Names were named, deals exposed. All across the galaxy, once powerful leaders woke to find their faces on public screens, branded as enablers of genocide. And one by one, they were removed, not by humans, by their own people, because Earth had changed the question. It was no longer, how we stop this? It was, what if they're right? The fire spread. Regimes fell. Alliances collapsed under the weight of their own shadows. And through it all, humanity stayed quiet, deliberate, cold. One Terran transmission was intercepted on a private diplomatic line, meant for a neutral observer species. No encryption, no code, just a single sentence. We didn't start this war, but we're going to finish your comfort with it. The message was clear. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. This was about remaking the rules. This was about teaching the galaxy, through example, that you don't get to hurt humanity and walk away. That when you kill children and call it strategy, you light a fire that doesn't stop with borders. It spreads, it consumes, and you don't get to unlight it, ever. The day the galaxy learned fear. The stars were quiet again. Not peaceful, not healed, just quiet. No new wars, no border skirmishes, no fleets maneuvering in the dark. Trade resumed, slowly. Diplomacy crept forward like someone afraid to wake a sleeping beast. Because while Earth no longer spoke, everyone remembered what it said in silence. The Zarnathi Confederacy no longer existed. Its space was empty now, abandoned, untouched, not quarantined, not claimed, just left alone. Because no one wanted it. No one even mapped it anymore. They called it the Ghost Sector, a scar in the stars. The Council tried to rebuild, of course. New policies, new codes of conduct, 1,000 new rules on engagement, ethics, interspecies law. But it wasn't about the rules. It was about what came before them. About Alera. Because every species remembered what happened. Not in the fire, but in the after. They remembered how Earth responded. Not with speeches, not with rage, but with focus, with silence, with precision. And nothing, not time, not peace treaties, not reparations could erase that memory. Entire military academies rewrote their curricula around it. Political leaders spoke in whispers when Terrans visited their systems. Civilian sectors adopted new safety protocols. No sudden movements near humans. Announce presence before entry. Keep all communication clear, direct, and honest. Not because the humans were angry, but because the galaxy now understood something it hadn't before. Something no one had wanted to believe. Humanity is patient, but it is not passive. For a century, Earth had cooperated, shared technology, helped mediate disputes. They smiled, they contributed, they tried. But deep down, under all that warmth, was something else. Something older. Something that remembered what it meant to survive being prey. A truth the Zarnathi forgot, and one the rest of the galaxy never will. A Terran historian put it best. We offered peace. We meant it. But peace isn't a leash. And when you hurt the innocent, when you think you can take from us without consequence, what you meet isn't our army. It's our memory. So the years passed. Quietly, carefully. And then a new power rose. A young, hungry empire. Unbloodied, ambitious. They hadn't lived through the Alera response. Hadn't seen the black fleets. Hadn't felt the silence. But they read the reports and dismissed them. Propaganda, they said. Exaggeration. Old war stories meant to scare children. So they tested their strength, expanded into forbidden space, launched pirate raids on minor Terran colonies. One skirmish, one destroyed outpost. No casualties, no real damage. But still a line had been crossed. And the very next day, their ambassador found something waiting at the edge of their territory. Not a fleet, just a buoy. Old, metallic, burned from age. It pulsed once, then opened. Inside was a single data crystal. Standard format, easily read. It contained no threats, Just a replay. Footage from Alara. The last transmission. The screams. The silence. Then a black screen. A single phrase appeared in Terran Common. We already forgave once. That was it. No response from Earth. No retaliation. No follow-up. Just memory. The young empire halted its expansion immediately. Pulled back from the Ghost sector. Issued formal apologies. Decommissioned their raiding fleets. Because they understood. They believed. And in the decades that followed, that belief became something stronger. Not hatred. Not fear. Respect. Across the galaxy, new generations grew up hearing the story of Alara. Not as myth. Not as propaganda. As law. It was no longer a tale of war. It was a lesson. That peace is not weakness. That silence is not submission. And that some species may look gentle, until you take from them what cannot be returned. Then, and only then, do you learn what fear truly means. Not because they roar, not because they conquer, but because they don't have to say it twice. Final whisper. They called it a war crime. But that wasn't the crime. The crime was thinking they could hurt humanity and survive it.